Welcome back to Partnerships Unraveled, the podcast where we unravel the mysteries about partnerships and channel on a weekly basis. My name's Alex Whitford. I'm the VP of Revenue here at Chanext, and this week I'm very excited to welcome our special guest, Anar. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you, Alex?
Excited to have you on today. Maybe for the uninitiated, you could give us a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what you do.
Appreciate the kind words. I've had the honor of being the VP of Ecosystems for Palo Alto Networks for about almost 7 years now, and it's been phenomenal growth during that time. We've gone from a single product company to a multi-platform company, and it's been exhilarating to be a part of. And then prior to that, I was also lucky enough to be a part of some other great growth stories. So I joined Nutanix when it was slightly over 300 people. And when I left, it was about 5 years later, it was about 5,600 people. And then prior to that, I just had a phenomenal learning experience at NetApp, doing a bunch of different roles for about a dozen years. So it's been being a part of all of these high growth organizations I've been really lucky to be a part of it and learn a lot along the way.
Nice. I'm hoping you bet the stock market as well as you bet the right company, because otherwise I need to start following you.
I wouldn't take my advice on anything.
We were discussing one of my favorite topics in the prep call, which is how the hell you interview and hire exceptional candidates. You spotted a couple of challenges maybe in terms of the interview procedure that people were doing online versus face-to-face. Talk to me about what that experience was like.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking a lot about this since we first spoke, and it's interesting because our CEO Nikesh Arora, somebody asked him during an all hands, like, what keeps you up at night? And his line is, I sleep like a baby because I hired good people to do the right jobs, right? And it's something that stuck with me, and I've thought about that as how I interview people. And some of the things over time, you have to change your interview style as well as hybrid work comes in, everything else. And one of the biggest things we instituted a couple of years ago was really emphasizing the importance of in-person interviews, because there's so much with what we do managing partnerships that while a lot of the work is done via Zoom and hybrid methods, for me to feel good about hiring people, that in-person check is key, and the things you can find there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm sort of half smiling. I'm slightly jet lagged at the moment. I just got back from a whirlwind trip to Denver and San Diego, and pride myself on being able to build digital relationships. But I think I did more work in 5 days than I did in the previous 6 months, right? Getting around a table, actually being able to talk strategy, go for a few beers afterwards. It does a lot more than anything you can possibly do digitally.
Yeah, I know it's in vogue now to talk about in the office and being in person, but there's truth to that, right? Like when we're getting, especially if you think about what we ask our partnership managers to do, is we're working with people, we're trying to bring commonality to people who work at different organizations to drive the right solutions for clients, right? And you need to be able to understand when we're evaluating talent, we need to be able to look at what their in-person presence is. We also need to find ways to test what their situational awareness is and how they pick up on nonverbal cues. And that's something that's really hard to translate through a video format, right? And then the other thing, it was interesting, I was at an offsite last week at our headquarters, and one of the sessions was that they brought in a specialist on improvisation. And it made me think back to about 10 years ago when we were building the channel at Nutanix, and we said, what do we really need to look for? And part of that was the key part of being an effective partner manager is your ability to improvise and think on your feet, right? Like when the situation changes, how quickly can you pivot? And, I can tell you, or at least my opinion is, you can try to suss that out through a virtual interview, but if the people we're interviewing are well prepared, like I would be in that scenario, I would have all my notes on the screen as I'm there. And what we're really testing for is if you're asking the top seller at a top partner or a top client lead or an account manager or a top engineer to go bet on you and what your company and the solutions you're bringing, that's not always going to be a scripted conversation. So the people who are the best at what they're going to do are going to be able to think on their feet and still achieve an outcome that both you and your partner feels good about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, especially with AI now, what you're able to do online digitally in terms of improvisations, it's gone up a factor of 10, right? So having those cues, maybe on some of the softer stuff, which I think we like to think that we're very sort of logical beings, but half of this is just done on being, hey, persuasive, charming, and maybe a bit funny. Talk to me about some of the softer stuff that you look for from an EQ perspective that you can only really sense face to face.
I think it's a lot of it is just your ability to listen and actually like, I joke when you're listening, and I try to teach the same thing, to tell the same thing to my kids. Are you listening, or are you just waiting for your turn to speak? Right. And it's amazing to me how many people in this industry, no matter what direction they've been given, here's the prep call, we do all the stuff for the meetings. But then when you get into the meeting, and that's where that situational awareness matters. Like, just because you have something that you've worked really hard to get a point across, if the conversation is changing and evolving in the moment, can you still get your point across in a way that flows with where that conversation is going to drive the outcome? Or are you just going to, I prepared these 7 bullets and I'm going to make sure I get them across in this meeting, come hell or high water, right? And it usually lands flat when you have, hey, I have a plan, I'm going to execute it no matter what, regardless of what's said in this next, 30 to 60 minutes. And it doesn't land, and it doesn't move the partnership forward or the engagement forward. And being able to look for that, I think, is critical.
You touched on, because I was actively listening in your introduction, about when you joined Palo, it was a single product business. That's
Yep.
no longer the case. You've gone from a wild strategy shift from product sales to platform sales. How do partners help shape and define that transformation?
It's really exciting because, the benefit of being at a company like Palo, where we've built a pretty strong, we built a strong business with partners with the single product, which is our next gen firewall, right? So what's really interesting is, as we've gone on this acquisition strategy over the last several years and buying all of these solutions that have helped us build these platforms like network security and Cortex Cloud, we have the benefit of a very strong install base with our partners. And our partners are also looking at cybersecurity as one of their main growth vectors. So being able to attach a brand that most of their sellers have experience and trust in, and also their clients are seeing value in, as we expand into cloud security, into SOC automation, into SASE, we've got the benefit of having more telemetry out there as the world evolves, as AI and cybersecurity continue to mesh together and are closely aligned into the brave new world we're heading into. You need to go with a partnership that you trust, and most of the large partners in North America have built high trust, high integrity relationships with Palo Alto Networks.
Yeah, and the thing that I always sort of love about partnerships, how that defines your product strategy, is almost partners can become the absolute leading experts, not just in terms of how the product is used, but how the product is sold. How important is gaining that feedback, and how that drives your sort of culture and your strategy for your organization?
It's getting feedback is important because we have, we're in the process right now of launching revamping our partner program, because our partner program, led by my peer Michael Corey, is one that was, it was built when we were a single product company. So what our partnership means right now to our partners and to our clients, we need to evolve what our partner program looks like, so that we're tying the value and the incentives to the right expansion benefits around platformization that are going to be critical, that create the right incentive and benefit structure to move beyond the firewall, beyond just the core network security business, to all of these other areas that over time, they shouldn't just be new areas to sell product. They should create massive services opportunities for our ecosystem.
And I think sometimes you touch on services there. I think sometimes people don't quite understand how important that service offering is to partners. Can you contextualize some feedback in terms of why that service is wraparound that partners are able to offer is so important and really is the lifeblood of their go-to-market?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I've always worked for manufacturers, right? And we always think that a lot of legacy thinking is that it starts and stops with the product resale, right? And when you look at the margin profile of a manufacturer compared to a partner, that's different. Our product margins are high and our service margins are low. On the partner side, their service margins are high and their product margins are lower, right? And that can drastically change what the financial makeup is of a partner organization if we can do that. Now, how that really matters in this transition from this transition and this journey we've been on over the last several years around moving from one product to multi-product and multi-platform is that especially if you think about a product like XIM, which we've seen significant success over the last couple of years, that represents a SOC automation and transformation opportunity for our partners, which that's the brains of the organization of most of these customers that we're selling into. And that can be potentially a 10 to 15 year services engagement with the client. So you want to talk about being super sticky with these clients. If you can position a SOC transformation solution and help that client manage that and actually show how we're improving their mean time to remediate and mean time to respond, that is transformational for partner businesses, and that can not just from stickiness to a client, but really long-term profitability of each client that they are successfully able to launch that within.
So we've touched on how partners are helping guide your program and your strategy, but that's bi-directional, right? You're also helping guide partner strategy, improving services opportunities. But we're at an inflection point now when it comes to go-to-market, obviously, AI. One of the things that I think we all understand is how AI is going to be embedded in your product and in your operations. But the channels application is still a little bit complicated. Maybe people don't have that absolute clarity in terms of what AI in the channel really means. What do you see as some of those near-term use cases for AI when it comes to programming?
I think, the tools we have, and we've even, if I look at my own team right now, we're pushing everybody to disrupt themselves with how they leverage these tools, because we can do different things, right? We can put in, and again, we have the benefit with the company we work for. We're forcing every single person in the organization to lean in with AI, right? And it's a big thought experiment right now. With I can speak to my leadership team specifically, where we've asked them to look at differently in terms of how they engage partners, how we can feed different information sources that we have into our LLMs and help give us insights to. So one is on the partner management side. We can buy cycles back for our own team by putting less time on some of these, whether it's account mapping or doing some of this analysis. It can get us started. Now, the human touch is also always required because you have to work with AI, not let it replace. But so one part is how we cut out some of the tasks for our teams to help get them ready quicker. But then the next step of it is, and I'm talking to a handful of partners about this right now, is how do we build tools that can more quickly allow and enable our partners to position and get smarter on the new solutions or the new releases of our products that we're pushing out to the market, and how do we enhance their ability to position them in front of the clients. And I think we can cut cycles out to drive a lot more efficiency there, but we're still learning how exactly we get there.
100%. And I think the thing I always encourage, right, is iteration. I think this area of the market's moving so quickly, both from our understanding, but also how the technology is developing. You almost need that Google philosophy of continuous experimentation. I think the partners that really take that to heart and understand that version 1 isn't going to be anywhere close to version 10, they're the ones that are really going to see the benefit.
Well, it also starts with the individual, right? Because as I'm learning on my own journey, learning to use these tools a lot better, as I use it more, the tools get better. And that's not like it's because when I think about how I've learned stuff traditionally and you know, is that it's very easy for humans to say, oh, it didn't work, didn't give me the answer, so I'm going to go find something else. There's a different learning with AI, with these AI tools. It's like, ask it differently, change how you're asking it. What can you switch up? And then as we're learning that experimentation at the individual level, that's teaching ourselves. And then as we teach that, we need to apply that to partnerships as well, right? And there's a nuance in there that I probably didn't say that the right way, but there's you do have the iteration is the key word. No, I agree with you.
No, for sure. Hey, if I put 2 plus 2 into a calculator, it spits out the right answer every single time, right? I think where AI is amazing is we can put much more complicated questions in. But as part of that, depending on how we ask, is how the answers we get. And this is, I do a lot of mentoring for people who are building their careers. Is the bit that I really double click on them, which is the ability for you to be able to guide AI will be your superpower in 2-3 years time, right? And so I think we're going to see rapid career accelerations for the people who have that superpower.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do a fair share of mentoring as well, and
I'm sure you do.
I try to advise people to stay curious and staying curious with not just your careers, but how you can channel that curiosity into leveraging these AI tools to come up with something unique and different, and most importantly, impactful. Because you can find tools, you can find AI applications or you can find applications for AI to make yourself more efficient and do other things. But when you really push yourself out of your comfort zone to get more, to tap into that curiosity, I think that's where we're seeing really, really unique and interesting and game changing outputs come that we can really leverage differently with our ecosystem.
Yeah, the bit, a mentor of mine actually, he told me, Alex, when we talk about AI, chase revenue, not cost reduction. And by that, he meant people intrinsically go, cool, I used to do this much work and now I can do it in half the time. But actually, that's not the superpower. The superpower is, how do I do this 10 times better? How do I go and implement it and drive it in creative ways so I can go and achieve more? Not, I can go home early.
And that's how we need to look at the ecosystem overall, right? If you're looking at it as an accelerator, then we can look at it. If we're looking at a way to cut costs, we're probably not going to find the answers that we're really looking for in terms of what we're really trying to drive in terms of value out of the ecosystem.
And so you've touched on curiosity, which I think is a really important word. Another word for someone in your position is honesty, which is, we often in partnerships need to be super upfront about what our priorities are. Sometimes our priorities might not fully align with a partner's priorities. One of those instances really often is getting partners to do really tough actions that drive mutual value, new logo acquisition being one of them. Sometimes it's easy for partners to rely on, how do I ambulance chase, maybe get involved in some deals that are probably already going to close, which you can understand from a partner's perspective, but definitely isn't your priority. How do you encourage the right behavior?
It starts with the honesty and integrity, right? If we have a hard message to deliver, I ask my teams and I ask our ecosystem partnership teams and our field sales team to deliver hard news early. If your client is telling us that they're dissatisfied with a specific partner, the right thing to do is to pick up the phone and tell the partner the position they stand in, right? If we do that, then we're okay. If we don't do that, then we get into some other messiness around just what our role is in it might be and might not be, and it's really never our role. Like we are committed to the channel. The problem is sometimes clients have a difference of opinion. Who knows where they're getting it from? But we can't just tell our partners what they want to hear, right? We need to tell them what we think, and that's what just being a high integrity individual and in a high integrity organization is all about. And we need to be transparent, right? Not just like a lot of times these things don't just present themselves out of out of thin air. There's usually a series of results that, or a series of events that has got us to that point. And the real question is, are we communicating transparently and effectively on time throughout the process? Or are we waiting weeks at a time? Because when you don't hear from your business partner, it's like, would you go, you just can't go dark on people, because then, that makes emotions and reactions probably much worse if it's been, but as long as you're staying in touch with them and you're being honest about that engagement, I think we usually end up in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I think a good rule for life: slightly painful conversation today prevents a really painful conversation tomorrow, right? And having that integrity to call out, let's not say bad behavior, suboptimal behavior, I think can course correct early, and it sort of brings people in line.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I understand why. Look, everybody, I'll never fault anybody for trying to maximize their comp plan, but it's okay as long as you have a tough discussion on, here's what's okay, here's what's not okay. We can usually get through it by the end of it.
Yeah, and I sometimes I think that misalignment or suboptimal behavior, it's actually usually a misunderstanding around what long-term success looks like, right? Which is,
Yep.
hey, if you tread on my toes now, we're just not going to have as productive as a relationship over the next 3 to 5 years that we both want. This is sort of what I need from you. This is how I can support that action. How do you you mentioned high integrity organization. How do you galvanize that attitude, that culture? Because it is hard to encourage people to have some of those harder, tougher conversations. It can be quite easy for people to fall into, let's just whisper sweet nothings and move on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just, it's continual. It's a challenge with what makes things challenging sometimes is turnover on both sides of the organization, right? Because look, there's just like the world we live in, people leave partners, people leave manufacturers, and whatever behaviors you may have known from your previous place of employment may not apply now. So we have to reinforce what our rules of engagement are, um, consistently across the board with both our internal teams and our external teams. And especially when you're dealing with with organizations as large as the collective cybersecurity community trying to sell more cybersecurity solutions to clients, there's going to be messiness involved. So it's like I ask my teams to make sure that our teams understand what the rules of engagement are. Whenever I have escalations with our clients, I try to get down to what's the core infraction versus what are the feelings, and how much of it is a sequencing issue versus a in terms of timing versus did somebody or was the intent to really do this, right? And a lot of that, it's just through picking up the phone. I'll go back to, this stuff doesn't get litigated through email. It doesn't get litigated through text messages. Usually you have to pick up a phone and we can figure out what happened pretty quickly. The strongest relationships I have in the ecosystem are ones that we can have the most sensitive topic there is. A big deal happens. If I can have a conversation with somebody, we can usually get on the same page on what happened and what the next steps are to move forward together. But a lot of times this age we're living in where everything's digital and there's so many different communication methods, that's where going back to a phone call, a conversation, meet for coffee, that's when we can usually, because people have a different reaction and a different engagement style, eyeball to eyeball, as opposed to being a keyboard warrior.
Yeah, I was going to say it's quite easy to intentionally do bad behavior. It's really hard to do that to my face, right?
Yeah.
When we've built a relationship and I helped you win there and you helped me win here, and we actually have something that we both enjoy and is productive, it's really hard to intentionally do bad behavior. And I usually find that intentionally bad behavior is actually just a misunderstanding, right? It's really, oh, I did not know the rules of engagement properly. And so I always want to see from my team, when that partnership breaks down slightly, what I want to see is, here's my responsibility and where that partnership breaks down. And I think that's where we build productive relationships.
And that's you hit on the key word, that is that we're putting that over the last couple of years, we're putting through the fiber of the sales organization here, which is what is the partner intentionality within the account, right? And if we have a clear partner strategy, that can usually, and we document it, we are upfront about what and more memorializing what both of our commitments to each other are going to be, we usually end up in a good spot. When we don't have that intentionality and we're not clear with each other on what our intentions are, that's when the conflict sometimes arises.
Awesome. Anna, it's been amazing having you on. Thank you so much. There is one more piece I need from you because we are a proper partnerships podcast. We ask our current guest to recommend our next guest. Who do you have in mind?
I think somebody who would probably have a great perspective on this would be, I'd recommend Craig Weinstein at NVIDIA. He's been a friend of mine for a number of years, but I joke with him that being a channel leader at NVIDIA over the last several years has to be such a unique, interesting place to live. But I bet you he's got some great, wild insights about what he's seen in partnerships living in the space he lives in.
Yeah, that's going to be, I imagine that's been a wild ride. I'm excited to have him on, but thank you so much for coming in yourself. It's been awesome.
Alex, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, bud. Good talking to you.